Welcome everyone to this session on Sage at 300 manufacturing. The objective of today is to spend as much time in the solution so you can actually appreciate all the various modules affecting or applicable to Sage 300 manufacturing. So what we'll cover today is I'll first start with an overview just to have a good understanding of the interactions between the Sage manufacturing modules and the core Sage 300 modules. We'll then dive into the manufacturing. We'll look at production planning. This is where MRP is being run, and then we'll actually, once we have manufacturing with recipes and items set up with lead time and networks, we'll get into some flow through. So we'll put in the sales order, run some MRPs, and then generate purchase requisitions, manufacturing orders, so you can actually see the software in action. And then we'll talk about shop floor. You can add the shop floor modules to track labor, track operations, track your process along the way on a manufacturing order. And then there's also a quality control modules available with the Sage manufacturing suite. So we'll spend some time to talk about that, and then we'll finish it up by looking at the barcoding solution. And when you think about barcoding, it's not necessarily just scanning, but this is a solution that allows user to capture transactions with a mobile device or a remote device. I'm going to say consuming a perhaps less expensive license to record transactions or movements of inventory, or in the case of shop floor, track operations. And then we'll wrap up. So the session today is set for, it would take about an hour and a half, an hour and 25 minutes. So that's the agenda. So the first part on the overview. So if you look at Sage manufacturing, the Sage manufacturing modules is referred to as AutoSimply. It's developed by a third party out of Hong Kong, and it's not. I like to position this as not an integrated solution, but as an embedded solution. So the software, the modules are built with the software development toolkit of Sage 300. It is labeled as Sage manufacturing, and if we didn't tell you, whomever is using, if any of you are actually using Sage 300, you'll see in the presentations today that the screen, the look and feel are exactly the same or very similar to the remaining modules of Sage 300, the core modules. So we could, if I didn't tell you otherwise, we could you would think that it's actually Sage that developed this. So I mentioned that as far as embedded, it's a single database. So this is not a separate database. There are other manufacturing solutions available with Sage, but most of them would have a separate database handling the manufacturing portion of it. Now, just a few key concepts from the interactions between the modules. So think about the MF. I'll be relating to MF for manufacturing during the presentation today. Think about MF as manufacturing as inventory control on steroids or with added functionality. The limitations, if any of you are trying to do manufacturing or assemblies in Sage 300 inventory control modules today, you know that the recipe, when you build the bill of materials, when you actually do an IC assembly, when you post an IC assembly, what you see is what you get. And what I mean by that is if the assembly requires, of a finished goods requires a quantity of, let's say, two of each of two components, when you build the assembly, well, you basically assume that the standard or whatever recipe it is the actual that was consumed. There is a mean through, perhaps through setting up non-stock items for labor and overhead that you could whip some labor and overhead as part of the build, but it's pretty limited as far as how you can track the cost, I guess, of perhaps your packaging or your components, and then the actual labor and overhead assigned to a work order. So if you wanted to manage, there's no mean basically to manage actuals or to maintain or to analyze actuals compared to standard. So when you change the recipe on a build, that becomes a new recipe moving forward. So there's limitations, I guess, in 300. So with the manufacturing modules, the reason why people will look at that modules on top of the IC is when you're, again, looking at maintaining a proper right? A proper process where you can go and generate a manufacturing order, you can issue materials against a work order, and then you're able to then track actuals and track perhaps scraps or waste, and then record the productions and actually record actual consumptions of those goods. Okay, so the manufacturing modules interacts at the item, at the IC level. So if you look at this graph here, the general ledger, the MF does not produce a general ledger entry. Manufacturing, when you consume goods, so when you actually issue material against a work order, or if you actually record productions, when you receive assembled goods, what it does is, depending upon your costing method in IC, in inventory control, it will either produce an IC receipt or IC shipment, or it'll do an IC adjustment. So if you think about, you're doing a build in let's say you're doing a backflush in manufacturing order, then the transaction would be both increase for your finished goods and a both decrease IC adjustments for your consumptions of raw materials. Okay, and then also the WIP will be affected, and then the overhead and labor. We'll see this in more details in the presentation today. Okay, so what I do want you to recognize is that there's no manufacturing MF does not push a journal entry. Everything flows through an IC, inventory control, and it's through either IC adjustments or through IC receipts and issues. The only other modules the only modules, I guess, that could put that has the options of interacting to GL is the shop floor. So in the shop floor control, shop floor allows you to actually push actuals for labor and actuals for overhead, and then you actually have, and we'll see this in the presentations today, where in the shop floor control options, you have the ability to update manufacturing orders cost and also push a journal entry to GL to allocate your actual cost to the work order and to the proper GL accounts. But that is optional. But from the MF standpoint, it doesn't talk to MF doesn't talk to the GL. It goes through IC. So we're also leveraging IC account sets, and we're leveraging IC categories. So how does it know, when I'm relieving inventory? Well, the credit goes to whatever account is assigned as a control account for the raw material, and then the cost of sales and the WIP is all handled through the IC categories. So think about this, and then the other concept is, think about this as AutoSimpli knows about the Sage 300 core modules. So IC, OE, PO, so order entry, purchase order, and inventory control. But any of the Sage 300 core modules do not know or do not recognize any of the AutoSimpli or the manufacturing modules. So for instance, if you put in the sales order, that's going to be a demand that the production planning or even the manufacturing order will recognize. So you can actually go and create a manufacturing order from a sales order. But if you look at the sales order, there's no mean from a sales order standpoint to look at the status of, where is it in production? Is it released? Is it how many were built? So a sales order entry does not see the manufacturing. On this flip side, when you're generating, and we'll do some today, is on the production planning side, when you're running your MRP and generating your purchase requisitions for raw materials that you purchase for production, it will interact with purchase orders. It will generate purchase requests, and then within the purchase requests, you're able to transfer those in purchase orders. So again, production planning sees purchase orders, but then from a purchase order standpoint, there's no mean, like it'll push in the comment field where it came from, but purchase orders does not know anything about production planning or manufacturing. Okay, so just think about that. So it's one way. It's basically feeding information and reading information from the core module. Okay, just from a sequence, if you're thinking from an implementation standpoint, the natural order of this would typically be, well, first of all, you do require inventory control to install or to implement manufacturing order, because your finished goods and raw material items are reading from a manufacturing order are reading from your IC tables, your item tables, and so that's a prerequisite. And so manufacturing, the manufacturing module will be the first one to implement. Production planning would be the second one, or perhaps you would do those two at the first as a first phase, so you can run your MRP. Then perhaps at a later time you can implement the shop floor. You could do the quality control and perhaps the barcode if you want to extend the capturing of data. But you know, as a foundation, the manufacturing order, or MF as we see on the screen, would be the first one. And then the last thing on this slide, and then we'll jump into the solution, is the manufacturing lot that you see on the bottom right. Manufacturing lot is just a matter of from a licensing standpoint. So if you're into, you know, food and bev, perhaps you most likely have, or maybe heavy equipment manufacturing, your finished goods would most likely be lotted or serialized. This is a licensing that's required to allow for the assignments, I guess, of serial and lot numbers, either on the finished goods or to capture serial or lot numbers for raw materials as you're issuing to the manufacturing order. Right? So there's no configurations per se. This is just leveraging, again, inventory control, serialized, and lot tracking. So what we have here is I'm logged into Sample Company, SAM Ltd. So we have some pre-populated data. As you can see, I'm into the standard Sage 300 screens. And if you look at the modules, I'm logged in as administrator, admin. So administrator have access to everything. And then from here, from the interface, you can see the accounts payables, the receivables, the general ledger, then you see the inventory control. And as part of the modules, as I told you, I mean, the look and feel, when you look at manufacturing, they look exactly the same as, right, from a navigational standpoint. The menus and then the screens look exactly the same as your other modules. So what we'll cover today, we'll dive into first into the manufacturing, then we'll look at production planning, we'll have we'll look at the quality control, their shop floor, and then the barcoding. So everything is, again, not a separate database, everything is embedded, and you, similar to your core modules, you would install the product and then activate those modules, and then those tables will be activated in the database. Okay, so that's a pretty critical concept to understand that it is a single database. So if we look at the manufacturing modules, let's look at a bill of materials. I like starting there first because from a bill of materials standpoint, we're touching on a lot of the kind of the concepts of the structure of manufacturing. So if we look at a bill of materials, we're going to focus today. I wasn't too inspired, but I like using this demo data because we're just going to call it, like, I refer to this as the items like as finished goods and raw materials. So that's easy for whomever, whether you're in food, whether you're into heavy equipment manufacturing, no matter what industry. I mean, a finished good is a finished good. So let me go into the finished good 101. Let's look at this one here, for instance. Okay, so again, finished goods 101, a few things that I want to highlight here. So the item number of the parent, right? So this is where we're going to build the actual recipe, the bill of material. So when we build the recipe, the first thing I'm going to pick is an actual finished goods item. Guess what? That item needs to first exist in inventory control. So nothing, you know, if you have inventory control in listing already today, or your items are created, that you're that much ahead to implement manufacturing. So that's reading that finished goods from, again, those items from IC. Then from a bill of materials standpoint, you actually have 3 fields that makes the key record. So an item could have multiple recipes, right? So in this case, you have a BOM number. This is bill of material number, like bill of material FG001C. But if you actually look here, there's actually this one here at 1, 2, 3, it's got different recipe. Okay, so again, maybe most of your items only have one, but perhaps depending on what type of manufacturing you're into, there may be different recipes or different means to get at the same finished product. Okay, so in this case, we have finished goods 001, the bill of materials number FG001C, and then within each of the BOM or the bill of materials, you have the availability to do revision number. Okay, and each of the combination of the item, BOM, and rev number makes a key record. Okay, so if I actually look at do a lookup here, you'll notice that my finished goods appear multiple times, but there's only, every combination is unique, right? So finished goods 1, BOM number finished goods 1, revision 1, and I've got a revision 2, and then I went into my second BOM, third BOM, okay? Each of the bill of materials, you can track whether their status, they're under development, are they approved, are they on hold, or discontinued. So only approved bill of materials can be included. You can only generate a manufacturing order or an MO with an approved BOM. Okay, it shows you automatically the last maintained date, and then you can have, in this case, let's assume this was a development bill of materials, or maybe it's approved, but it's only approved to start at a certain date, so you can actually put in the effective date. Discontinued date, if you actually know that a bill of materials, let's say maybe I have this recipe Rev 1 that's going to be discontinued at the end of this fiscal year or calendar year, I could put in this discontinued date. Again, you can only, this would prevent you from creating a manufacturing order for a recipe that's, past the discontinued date. Okay, so you have basically management, I guess, of bill of materials, whether they're into development, whether they're approved, maybe they're on hold for whatever reason. Maybe there's a recall, maybe there's an issue with an ingredient, then you could maintain that. You see the creation date, that's my original creation date of the document. Then we get into the BOM type. So the bill of materials type has, there's two types. It's either an assembly or it's a phantom BOM. So if anybody's not familiar with phantom, so a phantom basically assumes that in this, let's say you're into, I know yesterday we did some presentations around the jalapeno bean dip with Sage X3. If there's a part of the recipe that you perhaps will pre-assemble, and then you're going to basically use in multiple finished goods product, or perhaps you're going to pre-assemble and store on the shelves, those would be most likely a type of assembled, right? So you're generating a manufacturing order just to do that pre-mix or that mix. Spices could be another one as well. If you're thinking about heavy equipment, maybe there's part of the engine that you do, and maybe those engines could go into multiple type of finished goods equipment. So those could be assembled. In the case of phantom, the phantom means that when you generate a manufacturing order for the top level item, that finished goods 001, if any components within that bill of materials that are actually an assembly type of phantom, it will not trigger a separate manufacturing order for it. So therefore, it'll just be perhaps like part of an operation or a routing from that same manufacturing order. So all you're doing is you're basically recycling. You're pulling in a recipe or a list of ingredients or a list of components on that top assembly BOM or manufacturing order, but everything is managed through different operations on a single work order. Okay, so that's the difference between an assembled or a phantom BOM. And if you look at this one here, if we jump, when you look at if we explode this BOM here, so this BOM of finished goods 001 actually has a sub-assembly in this case. So we're saying, again, we're pretty generic with our terminology here, but this finished goods 001 includes semi-finished goods 002, which has raw material 1, raw material 2, semi-finished goods 003. It actually has three levels BOM. So we would first either assemble this, and then that rolls up into this semi-finished good 2, and then the final assembly would include that semi-finished good 2 with packaging material perhaps for that final assembly. Okay, so if those ones are, so if my semi-finished goods 002 is a phantom BOM and my semi-finished goods 003 is a phantom BOM, then one manufacturing order with all those operations will be created. The batch size, so the recipe here is for a standard batch size. So right now, the finished goods, so my finished goods 001, the units of measure will always be my stocking units of measure from IC. Okay, so in inventory control, my stocking units for finished goods 001 is in piece. So all the ingredients, like the operations, the components, which we'll review shortly, all of these quantities are based on a build of one piece. I mean, this could be like a 1,000 liter, this could be a batch, this could be a case, but in this case, my stocking unit being piece for my finished goods, everything is based on a build of one. It doesn't mean that I can't generate the manufacturing order for multiple, but right now this recipe is like if I do a build of 2, then it would multiply my components, my ingredients by 2. Is it a default BOM? As you can appreciate, that could have multiple recipes, but you would want to pick a default one. Why? When you run MRP, if you implement production planning, you will want a default BOM, because how would the system know which recipe you're going to pick, right? So that allows you to define which one should be suggested. And is this a subcontracted BOM? So perhaps there's some bill of materials that subcontractors handle. So if it's subcontracted, then instead of doing an internal MO, it would basically get the you would basically transact or record what the subcontractors are doing. Okay. On this screen here, you see the column for standard cost and calculated cost and a variance. This is one of the differentiator, as I highlighted earlier in the presentation, is if in inventory control, you're limited to adding components to a recipe, but you don't really have a breakdown. You're not that granular, right? So in this case, as we're putting in components, you can actually split between direct material costs, packaging costs. From a labor perspective, you can track setup labor, direct labor, and then you can do the overhead costs and subcontractor costs if you have any subcontracting operations. Okay, so you can be more granular in how am I maintaining and tracking costs on a build. So you have the split between those. The standard cost is reading from my item standard cost table. So every item, so when you do manufacturing, you typically would set up a standard cost for raw materials, and then you would roll up the standard cost into the build, and then you would roll up, if there's multi-levels, you would roll up, right to the actual, the sub-assemblies would roll up to the one level up. And that is required because you may be in a situation where perhaps you haven't finished recording all the transactions. Perhaps you actually have an MO for a manufacturing order for a quantity of 1,000, but you're going to be start to ship, and maybe as you're manufacturing, as you're producing, the goods are actually being shipped out the door, and you want to record those transactions, so you actually capture a cost of sales. So what you would do is assemble that standard, right? So there would be, in this case, every build is going to have a total cost of $15. So if I manufacture one finished goods 001, my WIP would be 15, and when I sell, I would, it would be basically depending on my costing method of my finished goods. Let's assume it's moving average. Then if I build a quantity of 1 and I have 15 for cost, it would do the 15 for cost of sales. And then when I actually finish or complete my manufacturing order, it will take my actual cost for material. It will take, and if you're doing the shop floor, it can take my actual cost for direct labor and overhead, and then it'll actually adjust WIP accordingly and make an adjustment to my finished goods inventory. So we're assembling at standard at first, but when the MO or the manufacturing order is closed, then actual cost for components gets pushed in, and then the inventory gets adjusted accordingly. Okay, the calculated cost, the difference between those two, this is reading purely from the standard cost record. If I was going to come in here and change an ingredients, or change maybe a quantity, or change anything from a resource standpoint, which we'll see shortly, this is going to affect my calculated cost. Now, until I go in and I update my actual standard cost tables, there could be a variance here. So what this post cost allows me to do is update my standard cost tables. So when I actually do the updates, when I actually do a build here, if I do a receiving of 1 for finished goods 001, it will do at 15. But if I was going to change the components, and let's say let's just do a components, and we'll up this at 2. We'll just make it 2, and then go general, right? So now this is calculated at 25. So there's a variance here of 100%, right? So direct material, as per my standard cost tables, is 10, but my calculation says 20, right? So if I was to hit the post cost, now this column is going to get adjusted. So my standard is now equal to my calculated, right? So that's just a mean for you to go back and update those standard cost tables. Let me just put this back to 1. I'm going to save this and go back and then hit my cost. Now it's going to go down to 10. So now, if I look at the operations, right, from, well, actually, let's skip the operations for a sec. Let's go to components. So components, what do I need to manufacture my finished goods 001? So I look at my list of ingredients. I can identify I would pull my components again from my item table, my IC item table. So here's my semi-finished 002. I would link every, I need at least one operation, right? From a routing perspective, I need a minimum of one operation. So I would link the item to which operation. Then I can identify, is this a direct cost? Is this a packaging cost? Again, allowing us to be a little bit more granular than the standard IC module. Is the cost variable or is the cost fixed? So in the case of, I don't know, let's say in the case of food, maybe you need to open 2 bags of salt on the production line. If you're into seafood, then, well, guess what? Those 2 bags, no matter what, whether you boil 1 lobster, you boil 20 lobster, you're going to need to consume that bag of salt. So this could be set up as a fix, on a fixed basis versus a variable basis. Okay, so that allows you to do the variables and fix. And then the quantities, again, how many of semi-finished goods 002, which location, IC location from IC, right? So which location am I going to pick these from? Percentage of scrap. So if I know that I'm, I don't know, maybe I'm into cutting lumber or steel, and I know that I've got 20% scrap. So if, again, for every 100, it's going to then require an extra 20%. It's going to suggest that I carry, that I consume the standard of an extra 20%. So when you run your MRP, again, that would recognize the percentage of scrap. So you don't need to figure it out yourself. The allowance, this is more from the subcontracting standpoint. If this was a subcontracted operation, this is more, this informational purpose only. So you can actually track the performance, I guess, of subcontractors as far as how much they've actually consumed. Start date, end date, if certain ingredients, I don't know if you're into, I don't know, maybe you have a recipe that you're into building certain products that in the summer you require a different mix than in the winter. I don't know, maybe concrete, maybe asphalt, right? Then maybe there's variations of the recipes, so that, or maybe like not so much the different ingredients, but maybe different quantities or different mix. So you can do that. Unit cost is coming from unit cost would be coming from the standard cost in the tables, and then there's my well, scrap cost. Right now in this case there's no percentage of scrap. Okay, so you would put in your list of components, and as you highlighted earlier, right? So that semi-finished goods right now is a sub-assembly, which we saw actually have another sub-assembly to make up that SF002, right? But right now we see the top level, and then there's 2 packaging material that we've actually identified as the type is set to packaging. If you look at the operation, so again, in this case, think about this as routing. So this, in this case, we have called this dummy operation, but we do require a minimum of 1 operation per recipe. So right now, operation 000 is tied to a work center, and then the work center, work centers can be set up. So think about work centers as, I don't know, maybe you have, in the case of seafood, right? You have the place where you actually cook, and that's one work center. You have maybe the cutting station or the butchering station. So those will all be the work centers, and within, or the areas, if you will. And then within the work centers, when we'll look at shop floor, then you'll have the ability to have multiple stations within those work centers. So for instance, if you're, think about the seafood side, like you're butchering maybe lobster tails, well, you may have 5 stations, but all in the, let's say lobster tails butchering sections. Okay. Then you can identify, again, for a build of 1, what is my setup time, right? So setup time would be pretty much like a fixed fee, right? So when I actually want to get my production line going, what is my setup time required for this? And that'll be important, because when you actually run MRP, what's my lead time? If I actually have, perhaps you're into some manufacturing where setup time could be a couple of days or a few hours, right? So you can identify that. Are you maintaining in hours or minutes. What is my runtime? So for every standard batch, right, what is my runtime? And then what is my cleanup time? And what is my wait time? So if there's any, if you had multiple operations, maybe there's actually, maybe the product needs to cure first, right? In the case, again, let's talk about lobster. Maybe it needs to cool off before you actually can start the butchering and the cutting and right and the assembly. So there, if there's any of those would all be calculated in your lead time for in your production planning. Okay, and then percentage overlap. So if you can actually start operation 2 before you're fully done with operation 1, this would be the percentage overlap. And again, that affects your total lead time or production time, and that'll affect when you actually run your MRP and your production planning. If it needs to be finished by a certain date, that'll affect when you should be starting. And remarks, you can actually put in just a comment for each line. So that's on the operation. And then lastly, on the BOM, if you look at on the operation side, you can actually assign resources and tools. So if let me just scroll to the perhaps on the next one. So this is an example, finished good number 2. So for operation 200, packaging operation. So what this is saying is that for that operation, for every direct or indirect labor, we basically have, for every one of these, we actually need 10 labor or 10 resource, a quantity of 10 at a cost of 105 per hour in this case. Okay, we need 10 direct labor of resource at DL1, DL2, we need another 10, and then the overhead we want to calculate as 10 as well. Okay, so you can have, and these would typically be set up, the resources would typically be set up by, think about this, by trade or by, I'm going to say pay grade, not necessarily by employees or by resource, but by, or specific employees, but by trade is probably the best way to put it. Okay, so you would basically set up a standard rate when you get to set up your resource in manufacturing. You would set up a standard rate per trade or pay grade, if you will, or function, if you will. And there's means to, in AutoSimpli, to track tools, not necessarily tools check in and check out, but if you wanted to, I don't know, maybe in the case of heavy equipment, maybe there's a forklift or a crane or whatever that actually was quite expensive, maybe a CNC machine that you want to associate part of the cost to the, you want to whip part of the cost to the every assemblies. Maybe it's got a useful life based on usage. Then you can again create your tools and then put in the tools here, which will again pull from a standard cost that you've identified in the manufacturing setup. So as you can see, pretty elaborate. I mean, you have the ability to do routings. It's got some pretty good features from a manufacturing standpoint. Versions, this allows you to track ECO numbers, right? Engineering change order date and number. You can put in a reference, authored by, approved by. You can attach a document. At this stage, we're only able to attach a single document per BOM, but this could be where you attach your drawings or whatever history you have on that BOM, on that specific. And again, the key records being the item number, the BOM, and rev. Okay, instructions, if you want to print like a traveler document, an actual MO that's going to travel, if you're not using barcoding, then that could be that would be set up. You could print instructions. If there's any co-products, so there may be in the case of, I don't know, in the case of steels perhaps, or lumber, or if you're cutting and then you can actually make something up with the waste, or with the, if you're into chemicals perhaps, you end up with some co-products, so you can identify those. Okay, and then there's the optional field, again, using, if there's additional information you want to track from a BOM, from a bill of materials standpoint, you can leverage the optional field, which is a core feature of Sage 300. Okay, so that's on the bill of materials. So we've talked about, again, mainly the BOM. We've talked about the concept of the work centers. We've talked about the components. We talked about resource, right? So that covers a good chunk of the manufacturing piece. Just quickly on this is on the manufacturing. I talked earlier about the like the debits and credits. So those of you who perhaps are wondering like how is this going, is flowing? So what you do is, and again, this is leveraging IC. So for every inventory control account set that you have set up. So I'm reading from my IC table here. So every items that are set up as an average cost, then this is above, right? This is actually specific to AutoSimply. So you're then you would then create an IC, a WIP category, and guess what? The WIP the WIP account would actually be your WIP, your 1340. Okay, in this case, we're a work in progress, and because remember, like we're actually leveraging inventory control, either IC shipments and receipts or IC adjustments. So it needs to know when I'm consuming material, where's it gonna go in? Well, it needs to go to WIP. If I'm actually completing the MO, then WIP has to be cleared. So this controls the WIP account. It controls the credit for my setup labor, credits for my runtime labor, credits for subcontractors and overhead. So and this would be at standard cost. So the labor, the runtime labor, setup labor, and overhead would be at whatever standard rate that I have on my MO. So you would credit those accounts and then debit WIP. And then once you close the MO, credit WIP and then do the adjustments, I guess, to the IC account, control account. Okay. I'll spare you the rest, just doing a time check. So let's so that's the manufacturing modules. We're gonna jump into the production planning. Then we'll come back and generate a sales order, run the MRP, and then we'll go into a manufacturing order. Okay. So the second modules that we're going to look at is, again, production planning. So production planning allows to set up lead time, allows to set up min-max, allows to identify whether the item is a build or a purchased item. So the first thing is let's say you have a plant in New Brunswick, and then you have a plant in BC. Well, guess what? Chances are your lead time, or perhaps even your supplier, may be different between the two, right? So what you have is a concept of network. So right now, for today's presentation, we'll focus more around the network one. Perhaps in network one, I have two locations. In this case, it's Seattle and Portland. So they're in two relatively in the vicinity, relatively close by. So those two would be my network one, perhaps network two in this case, New Jersey, Port of Vancouver, network three, right? You get it. So your network would pretty much be like you may have a buyer per network, for instance, right? So and again, in the item planning tables, you have the ability to have different setups by item by network. That's what allows you to do. The second concept of purchase planning is the buyer and planner. So for instance, if I'm the buyer, so I procure all the raw materials, and perhaps Jeff is actually the procurement for packaging, then perhaps I create myself as as a buyer. I would create Jeff as a buyer as well, and perhaps Amanda is the production manager. Then I would set up Amanda as a buyer planner as well. And then in the item planning table, I'm able to tag, if I go look at finished goods 001, well, guess what? Amanda is the manufacturing manager. So I would then associate finished goods 001 for network one. I would basically assign this to Amanda. And we'll see shortly that when you run MRP and you look at your suggested or your plan, you can then filter by buyer and planner. So Jeff gets to see the packaging items only. I get to see the raw material. Amanda gets to see the production planning. Okay, so that's one way to set it up. You don't need buyers and planners, by the way, so you can still totally ignore them. But though that's a nice one, especially between purchasing typically and manufacturing. So if you look at the item planning table, so again, I'm reading from my IC table. So when I click, and there's a mean to import data, by the way. But if I look at the finished goods 001, okay, and again, the key fields in this case is the combination of the item number and the network. So finished goods one, network one. I've identified that this is not a purchase or subcontracted. It's manufactured, right? So when I actually run my MRP, guess what? It's going to suggest an MO or a manufacturing order and not a purchase requisition. Do you want to allow the creation of the order, an order being, again, in this case, a manufacturing order? Is this on a schedule? So the schedules, I can go none, weekly, monthly, odd week, even week. What that does, if I don't have this on a schedule, if I have demand, whether in my forecast or sales orders for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of next week, it would generate, suggest 5 manufacturing order in my plan. Okay, so it's going to assume that, you know what, yeah, you need whatever you need today. I'll suggest a plan. If you do this weekly, well, it would then recognize the demand for that week and then suggest a manufacturing order for a quantity that will suffice for the whole week, and so forth and so forth. Like, right, if you look at the monthly, well, at the beginning of the month, odd week, even week. Okay, so you can control this, and again, at the item and network level, right? You may have a different reality. Maybe your production plan in Halifax is different than the Port of Vancouver. Then you could have different settings by items and network. Maximum stock order, minimum stock, you can set up min-max. You can do the, what about minimum order? There might be some suppliers where, again, right now in this case, we're manufacturing this, so we have a minimum build of 1, but maybe we would say, you know what, if we're going to start the production line because of the cost involved, because of the time, you know, we're not going to, like, we have a minimum of 5 or 10 or 15. Okay, lead time, so order lead time in this, or actually in this case, manufacturing, order lead time, sorry. So this is the total lead time for manufacturing. There's a mean to, in periodic processing, there's a mean to update the manufacturing setup and manufacturing runtime based on the calculations from the MOs that we saw earlier. So because again, in your MOs, you've set up all of that information is there. So there's a mean to come and update these values through a utility. And we ordered multiples of 1. That's actually being pulled by the, actually no, the multiples of 1s is fine. So it's got nothing to do with the MO, the batch size. So, okay. And there's no buyers in this case, and then that's fine. Okay. So, and the second item, if I look at the raw material, let's just look very quickly at raw material, doesn't matter, raw material 12. Again, this one here would be set up as a purchase, and then you could have a minimum order, min-max, but pretty similar as the manufactured item. Okay. So now we've talked about network, talked about buyers and planners, and then we talked about item planning. We can define in the planning side, we can define calendars. Okay, so what is my calendar? And then I can then define working days and non-working days. What is my typical, what are my rest days, right? If I'm manufacturing, am I actually manufacturing only from Monday through Friday? And then if I'm, you know, perhaps there's some exceptional weekend that I want to actually run overtime, or I want to, maybe I've got next Friday off, then I would put in my holidays here. So when I'm running in my MRP, I can include my different various calendars in my MRP, and then it'll consider this for my my start date or my purchase date. And then the plan scheduler. So this is just a mean to automate the MRP. So MRP can take, you know, minutes or hours to run. So what you would typically do is do the settings here through a Windows task that's scheduled. It would trigger the MRP run. So the planner or production manager would come in the morning. MRP would be run already, and what they would see is the demand right there. They would look at their plan and then plan accordingly. Okay. So let's actually run MRP right now. So in production planning, we'll go into to the planning run. We'll just do a planning run here for network one. We can do an actual run. We could do some simulation as well. So let's just do an actual run. Forecast. We'll park this for now. There's nothing right now in this forecast that's going to affect this, but we'll come back after. I'll show you how this would affect the outcome. The calendar, we'll just use a default. And in here, we have options as far as what do we want to include, right? Do we actually want to do we want to expedite MOs, right? If I have runs or manufacturing orders on the floor or release already, right? Perhaps I want to, instead of generating a new one, maybe I want to go in and say and update the ones that I actually have released and say, you know what, manufacture more because I just got new orders that came in. Do not expedite POs and PRs, right? So again, if I have items on purchase orders, do I want to have the ability to say, you know, call the suppliers and, well, just add 5 more to this one versus generating a separate one, right? Do I want to include stock, min-max? Do I want to include consider my inbound POs? Do I want to include my MOs? Because my MO is part of demand. if I have to build so many finished goods, that's going to require some material. Well, I need to consider this in my run. Okay, so let's just do. I'm going to rerun this. It'd be beautiful if MRP would run this fast all the time, but this being demo data, of course, doesn't take too much. 6 seconds to run. So now let's look at, and this is usually when I come in the morning, I'm a planner, I'm a purchaser. This is usually the state that the data would be at, right? So the planning run, MRP would be run automatically from the scheduling overnight. Maybe we run this twice a day. Now I come in, I want to look at my network run, network one. I want to look at the actual planning run. Maybe I want to look at all numbers. Remember, like I can then filter by buyer or planner. I won't filter it for now. And I could have a cutoff date. Right now, the cutoff date will depend, right? If you're in purchasing, you're probably going to extend this to your as far out as you have your longest lead time, right? If you have suppliers that has a 6 month lead time, I'd probably want to consider 6 months down the road to make sure that I can, if I issue a PO today, that I'll have the goods on time. Okay, so your cutoff time, same thing for production. So if I'm actually planning 6 months out, then I would pick my 6 months out. Do I want to see all items or only items that the plan picked up something, right? There's an action item, either a work order suggested or a purchase requisition. And let me just refresh this. Okay, so right now, if I look at my finished goods one, right, this is my list of items. So I've got some finished goods in there. So I would assume, just looking at this, that it's probably going to, like, this would generate manufacturing order suggestion. These were for packaging materials, raw materials, semi-finished. Well, semi-finished would be assemblies, but all those ones would be purchase rec. So if we look at this finished goods 001, for instance, let's look at the item plan. Then we can look at it in detail. So we have the stock on hand, we have 46. There's no max or min stock, so that's fine. We look at the setup time, that's all right. There's a minimum order of 1, and we ordered multiple of 1. So there's no minimum orders of 5 or 10 or whatever. So if you look at the history here, again, this is sample data, so this can sometimes be a challenge because of breadcrumbs in the system. But if you look at this, so I had on 05/19/2021, I had a quantity of, there's an order basically that's dated in 2021 for a quantity of 50, okay? That I haven't shipped yet, right? So that right now I basically have 46 on hand, but I have not fulfilled that order for 50. So I'm short right there. I'm short of 4 just to fulfill this. On July 13/21, I have another order, so order to 82 coming from sales order. Remember, like AutoSimply or production planning sees the core modules of Sage 300. So now I have 52. Now I'm short by 6. And then if you look at the sales order 103 for dated November 10th, 2023, this is a pretty big order. So now 995. So I haven't shipped those. So now I'm actually short of 1,001. So what the system is going to do is, because I have a manufacturing setup time of 5, it's going to put the due date on the we're the 29th today. So it'll put the due date on the 5th, and then it'll plan. So we're saying, you know what, the quickest or the soonest we can have those ready would be the 5th because of the lead time of 5 days. But it's like, okay, you know what, let's put that in today, right? Let's put in this request today for 1,001. If I had a minimum stock of 10, then this would have been 1,011, okay, and so forth. Okay. So now so right now it's doing a suggested quantity of 1,001. Let me do something real quick here. So let's go in and put in a sales order, just a quick another sales order in the system. So let's go into order entry. And let's do a new order entry. Let's sell to our famous Coastal Electric. Coastal Electric will be buying that finished good 001. Again, I'm in sales order entries as the core module. So this knows nothing about recipes or versions, right? I'm just looking at my finished goods 001. And I'm gonna just keep it easy. Let's do a build of an order of 10. Okay, I'm gonna post this. No need to print this. And I've just accepted, like this needs to be shipped, like let's say today. You know what? I'm actually gonna change the ship date on this one to, let's do the 5th on this expected ship date. Let's do this 5th on that. December 5th. Okay, let's post that. Don't want to post that. Okay, so now I have an order for 10 more. So let's go back into production planning. Let's go and do another planning run. Again, I can wait overnight to run this, or I could just rerun this because I want to consider my new orders that just came in. Since it only takes six seconds, I'm like, hey, 7 seconds this time. So if I look at the planning inquiry summary, let's go back and revisit my network 1. And this is an actual run, that's fine. And I want to extend this to, that's fine, let's say to January, and do a refresh on this. Now, if I look at my finished goods 001 and look at my item planning, right, you'll notice that my plan order is now for 1,011, right, which was 1,001 before, because I also need to fulfill my order 104. Okay. So the same thing would go for, so this is a plan order. If I look at my raw material, for instance, we'll just look at one. If I look at my item plan, same idea. It'll consider what is the demand, and then the plan order in this case is going to do a plan order of 99.25, and this would trigger a purchase request as opposed, because this order type is purchase, not a manufacturing order. Okay, makes sense. So now that we have the planning summary, so let's close this. Again, I could have showed you where you actually can filter by planner or buyer, but I think that's pretty straightforward. Now let's go into the generate orders, right? I can generate my MOs, or I can generate my purchase requisition. So let's go into generate MOs. So again, this is based on the plan, the MRP that ran. Now I will go to my network 1, and I want to plan for all items, and I want to plan between today and, let's say maybe I'm planning 1 week out. And I could, again, filter by buyer, by planner as well. Maybe, I mean, I gave the example earlier that one planner would do all items, but maybe you have different production line or or items. Maybe you want to segregate those as well. And the area code, I'm going to basically pick the bin area, and let's just go. Now, the default MO status. So this here will basically list me all of my recommended, my suggestion from my plan, from my run, right, my MRP. So included in this is my finished goods 001, and there were other items as well. Then I can select either include everything. Do I want to include my phantom bomb in this? So again, I'll say yes to this, and then I'll switch this from yes to no. Just from no to yes, sorry. So what I'm doing here is I could create all, or I could basically select which of the MOs do I want to create. Now the MO status, the manufacturing order, what status do I want to give? Do I want to basically create a new? I'm only able to allocate time or issue material or record build on a released status MO, right? Now, whether I want to use the new and approved status internally, totally up to you. Some organizations have someone that generates them, and then perhaps the plant manager approve, and then the floor manager perhaps would release them as accordingly, right? Once the date comes by. So again, new and approve from having the ability to record transactions on them, no can do, but on the release side they could. So let me just go and let's just do this as a new, and I'm going to post this. So what we're doing here is we're creating a manufacturing order, number 60, for that document, for that line, right? So now if I refresh this, now you'll see that my finished goods 001 is out, okay? So at the same token, maybe I look at that purchase requisition, and again, network 1, maybe there's some raw materials that's required. So if I look at this and I say, you know what, give me everything that I need for up to December 29th, and I'm going to basically just do this, and oops, I keep forgetting about locations. I'm going to do this based on location 1, which is my warehouse 1, and these are my list of ingredients, raw materials that needs to be purchased. Okay, so if I do a create all here, okay, I could edit the quantities here. Again, those are suggestions, right? I could go and edit the quantities if I want to. And if I click on post, what this will do is create a purchase requisition 18. And at this stage, this is leveraging the standard purchase order functionality within PO. So this has nothing to do with manufacturing, if you will. If I look at the PO transactions and look at my requisition entry, and then we'll just look at 18. If I look at 18, there's my list of materials, okay? And then from here, if I have a vendor through vendor items in IC linked to every one of those items, then when I create my purchase order from my purchase rec, it would assign the vendor. Or as a buyer, maybe I go here and I say, you know what, yeah, I am gonna get this from this vendor. And here's, by the way, I'm gonna shop, here's my price, right? Here's my cost, right? So I can go and modify, and again, I can still modify my ordered quantity here. Those are suggestions right now. So the idea would be to take this purchase requisition, and then create the POs. So if I look at create purchase orders, so if I go and create POs from Recs, I'll just show you here. So if I do this, and I'm gonna do all the way up to, let's say, to December 29th, and include blank vendors. And in my blank vendors, right, as you noticed, my purchase requisition was all blank, no lines actually at a specific vendor. But in vendor items, if you're familiar with IC, within vendor control, you can define up to 9 vendors. So I'm gonna assume that I'll use the vendor 1. So now if I click on generate, any items that are set up with a vendor for vendor 1, then those POs would get generated. Okay, so now you actually created 2 purchase orders. So if you look at purchase orders, my last 2 purchase orders would include, right? So there's one for 5 items, right? And again, there's a quantity ordered, unit cost. I didn't have vendor cost set up in here, so I could go and maintain that. And then the previous one add for 2. So chloride system, I'm purchasing that packaging material from chloride, and then I'm purchasing my raw materials from Intercontinental. Okay. Now, just a side note here, I know this is about manufacturing, but if you're in distribution and you do not implement manufacturing, the MF or manufacturing module, then this production planning, they have a same module, but it would be called purchase planning. Okay, so there's the ability, if you're a distributor listening to this thinking, I'm not a manufacturer, but running this MRP and helping me do purchase requisition would be fantastic, you can. So it's actually called purchase planning. And guess what? In your item planning, you just wouldn't have the ability to select manufacturer for this order type, right? Everything would be purchased. Okay, so that same functionality, everything we talked about would exist short of the manufacturing order or the ability to generate manufacturing orders. Okay, so that's the production planning module. Now, if we go back to, let me see here, we're into MRP. Yeah, we're actually right on cue. So let's look at the manufacturing order that got created. So let's jump back into the MF or manufacturing modules. We'll go to the MF transactions, and then we'll look at the manufacturing order entries. Okay. So our MO, we could have manually created a manufacturing order. We don't need production planning, just to be clear. So that production planning is a guide or is a help, a tool for us to figure out what we should purchase, what and when, and then what we should manufacture and when. But manufacturing can be implemented in the remaining modules without that production planning. You just don't have the MRP, you would have to figure it out by yourself. Okay, so if you recall our MO60 that we just generated, we had said that the status was going to be new. Okay. Now, because it's new, if I was going to try to do a material issuance from the standard screen or even from the barcode, I would not see the MO60 because it's not in a release status. Okay. And now if you look at this, there's the BOM version. So it did the finished goods 001C, version 1. How did it know this? Guess what? If you recall earlier, that BOM, that combination of finished goods 001 with BOM number finished goods 001C and version 1 was a default one, right? It'll always pick the default. And then if you look at the material, there's my list of materials. And again, if you recall the components that we saw on the original bill of materials was not that expanded, right? It was actually a semi-finished goods 2 and the packaging material, PM, I believe it was PM1, PM2. But because the semi-finished goods 2 is a phantom BOM, remember what I said about phantom BOM, it will not generate a separate manufacturing order. So this now it created a single manufacturing order. And if you look at the operation, guess what? When we looked at the operations from that top level assembly, it only included that dummy operation, that 000. But guess what? That sub-assembly semi-finished goods 2 that consumes the other ones actually had an operations 300. So it generated that 300 as well, right, in a single manufacturing order. If this was not a phantom BOM, right, if that semi-finished goods SF, I think it's SF2, if I'm not mistaken. Just hold on. So if I go to SF2, yeah, SF2 is set up as a phantom. If this was set up as an assembly, then the system would have triggered, I would have seen SF2 as a separate line, and then I would have had to generate a separate MO for it. Okay, so let's go back at this. Now again, because we're in a new status, I could go here and perhaps, again, computers are smart, but sometimes we know things that computers don't. So you could, right, the orders was for 2011. Maybe I know something. Maybe actually a specific customer called us and said, you know what, I actually, I'm thinking I'm going to be placing this afternoon an order, a rush order. Can you actually provide me 100? So you could, before you release this, you could basically up this by 100, right? And then save it, and then you could go in and release this. Okay, so I'm going to basically make this as a release. The order date, same thing. So the system suggested that, hey, if you need this, the soonest you can have this is on the 5th. Start today. I could go in here and say, you know what, I'm actually going to start tomorrow and do that as well. So you can modify those order date and due date before you release them. Okay, if for whatever reason that I wanted to modify for whatever reason the ingredients, I could do that as well. So you can add ingredients, you can modify ingredients, you could modify the quantities. Again, changes can be done on this. And if this was actually generated from a specific sales order on the SO detail, you would actually see the details. Now, there is a mean, so manually right now, if I wanted to, I could say, you know what, part of the build for this is actually for sales order 104 that we just created, okay? And the detail is actually finished goods detail line number 1, right? Again, MF sees sales order entry, or sales order entry does not see MF, right? So if I actually look at sales order 104 right now, I could not see that there's a manufacturing order 60 that's created. But if I actually link this, I mean, through a report, maybe through SCI or through a Crystal report, you could actually build the link between those two. Okay. So let me just delete this and save. Okay. So right now, I mean, I could print the traveler or the work order if I wanted to, but right now my MO60 is actually in a release state. Okay. So without the shop floor right now, there's 2 things that I can do with this. I can wait until production is fully finished and I get a report, and I'm going to track I would then record the 1111 quantities or whatever was produced, and I could record the actual consumptions in material, right? That's what's called a backflush. So I could wait until the and I could wait until the full assembly is done, go into MO backflush, and the backflush in essence is a single screen or a single process that allows me to do receiving of finished goods and issuance of material, right? That's all it is. I'm waiting at the end, production is done. I'm basically doing, in this case, let's pick the hold on here. Let's do the production area 21, because I could have multiple production area, and I'm going to pick my MO60. There's my MO60. Okay. Now there's my MO60. The quantity ordered was 1111, right? I could say receive all, so that's gonna basically, yeah, that's fine. This is what I run into on demos, probably short on raw material, but nonetheless, like right now, I'm receiving 1111. So there was none received previously. This is kind of a deceiving columns. People get confused, but there was none previously received, and I'm actually receiving in this transaction 1111. If you look at the issuance, my issuance, this is my list of ingredients, and then by, again, none issued so far, and these are, again, based on my standard, this is what it's going to look at consuming. Okay. Now, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the difference between this and IC assemblies is I'm able to say, you know what, I only consume 2 and 2 and 2, right, of this, right? So I'm going to actually, you know what, I'm going to do 0 of this, 0 of this, right, 10. Again, this may not make sense. You're going to say, well, how did you figure it out? How did you manage to assemble? But I just want to point out that actuals can be captured here. Again, that's through a backflush. So again, I'm waiting until the production is fully done, and I'm recording actuals productions. I didn't have to do a full. Maybe I'm doing, maybe I did 1100 here on the build, and then the issuance, I can actually capture the actual issuance of this. Okay, so let's actually do this. I'm going to post this. So in essence, I'm doing a receipt, an assembly receipt, and I'm doing a material issuance on this. Yeah, that's fine. That's because we had been tracking, activated this on this previously, so that's all right. So if you go back to so now the second method, right, is I could actually have the manufacturing order released, and then as I'm consuming material, maybe at the end of the day or as I'm doing it, I could go and do issuance against that MO, right, against that traveler. So I go at so I would then generate a new issuance number, and then there's my production area will be my 21, and then I would go, then I could basically put in my from MO60 to MO60. Let me just do this, right? And then let's do this. Okay. So again, I could even single in a zoning on an operation. We had 2 operations, that dummy operations, and then 300 operations. So in this case, I'm going to say all operations. What is I've got packaging and raw material in this case, right? And again, this will then give me what's left to issue, right, for this, and I can go in and I could issue all, or maybe I want to issue one more of this. That's it. So I'm just doing one more issue of that material. Okay. So again, the process is I haven't received any goods yet, but I'm actually issuing material against that manufacturing order. Okay. So that's one mean of doing this. And then on the flip side, I could also be doing a receipt. So again, the example that I gave earlier, you might have a production run that lasts over multiple days, and then in the meantime, at the end of day 1, maybe there's a tractor trailer waiting for whatever's finished to be shipped out, right? So you may want to record receiving, and again, receiving can be done before the MO is fully finished because you're assembling at standard, and then when the MO is completed, actual cost will be whipped and inventory adjusted accordingly. So again, the same concept from a receiving standpoint as issuance would happen. Okay. Just in essence of time, I'll skip this process, but I want to go back to the MO. So if I actually the MF, sorry. So in MF transactions, if I go back to the actual MO entries, right? If I open up the manufacturing order, And now when I look at my total, I would then see my standards were this, that's my projections, and there's my variance, and there's my actual. So I actually have some raw materials, packaging materials, and because my setup and direct labor are based on my, there's some of this that's actually based on build, on quantities, on packaging, on components. It basically did right now, it's we're seeing 62.95 and 64 for the cost. Okay, when you look at the production here, so there's quantity produced, so there's 11 that on the original order, and we're at 99% complete. There's still 11 that needs to be completed. Okay. Now I could go in here and say, you know what, that's it. I mean, I managed to build all of this with that entry only, with those quantities. So now if I actually hit the close and hit the save, now what this will do is do a closeout entry, an MO closeout entry, and I'll show you what it looks like if you copy this, and if you look at the MF under the if I look at the MF, and if you look at the MO cost report, no, I want to do the detail report by product. No, sorry. So detail cost. Sorry. So if I look at the MO cost report, and I want to do this in detail. I just want to show you when I find that this illustrates good. It's a good illustrations of how you're recording it at standard and then adjusting to actual. So right now, these are my actual consumptions of material. Okay, so remember, like I changed the first one to 2, 2, 11. I think I skipped one material that I just didn't do. So when I actually recorded on that backflush transaction, I actually recorded the receipt of 1100. Okay, that recording of the receipt, it did it at standard, right? It actually did it at, it basically posted a debit of, or it received that item at 22,550. Okay, when I did my closeout adjustments, it actually looked at the actual cost. So based on the costing method of each of the units, and my actual cost was actually a lot less. So it actually did a closeout adjustments of -16. So my material cost ended up being 61.79. So if I looked at my inventory right now, that addition or my net change, there would be an initial IC adjustments of 22,000, and then it would be a cost only decrease of 16,639 for items finished goods 001. Okay, so if I actually looked at my inventory control and look at the IC transactions and look at my adjustments, and then there should be an adjustment here for, let me see here, 1129, is that it? Right, so there's my boat increase for 22,550, which is my original. Okay, and then there's my cost increase of finished goods. That's what's for my, what those two are my overhead, right, and labor allocation. And then there should be one for, hold on, there should be one for, there's my CL, there's my closeout entry. So now what it did my cost decrease of 16,370, and then it actually did a cost decrease for the benefits on the allocation of labor. And okay, so again, everything goes through. It didn't go through straight through GL. It actually would flow through the IC module. Okay, now if you look very quickly, doing a time check here, we have about 10 minutes left. I know we have shop floor, quality control, and barcoding to cover. On the shop floor standpoint, so everything we've seen so far is based on actual for components and then a standard for labor. If you were looking at tracking productions, actual times against an MO, that's where you would implement the shop floor control. So on the shop floor control, you basically, what you do is you actually add stations to the mix. So you basically have stations that's more granular than the work centers. So stations would be set up at the and then assigned to work centers. And then think about this as users on the floor or after the fact would basically record operations, right? You would record operations, start, stop. You would record how many you've actually built against a manufacturing order. Okay, so the idea here is you would create your users, you can assign shifts, you can do the align up your operators, so that now at this stage, from an operator standpoint, these operators would be by trade again, right? And then the operators would be assigned shifts, and then you can have reason codes. I mean, whatever reason codes could identify downtime, indirect stoppage, rework, right? And again, the shop floor is all about efficiencies or productivity. So where, you know, how am I doing from a standard or actuals, I guess, how efficient am I, right? How much time am I really spending on everything? And then do I actually want to track actual cost of those labor hours and machine hours? Do I want to update my actual manufacturing order? So there's an option here to allow shop floor to update MO actual cost, or perhaps I only want to implement this not to affect GLs and update the actuals, but I want to do this so I'm able to run reports on efficiencies and how much time I've actually spent, so I can go back and adjust my standard, for instance, for my runtime and setup time and all that good stuff. Okay, so the shop floor again. So the idea is setting up operations, setting up the stations, and then users from a transactional standpoint are able to do a shop floor entry. And when you're doing a shop floor entry, you're doing what? You're actually, you know, inputting time against an MO. So if I actually do a start time here, let's pick operator ID 1. So MO, we'll just pick one. Let's pick this 54 here, which was a previous one. We'll pick operation 300 just to show you. And then my station, and all of these could be defaulted when I'm actually logging in. Like I would typically like either scan or enter the MO number, but I could be assigned to a default station that's assigned to a work center. And now what I can do is I can say, you know what, I'm just going to save this, and now this is starting the timer, right? Or maybe I want to also record. Maybe let's save this. So right now what I'm doing is I'm actually starting the time, and then I would go back and log in and then stop the time, and then perhaps track receipt quantities. How many did I process in this operation? So right now this is the mixing work center. How many have I mixed? How much have I mixed? What was my scrap? So I can record scrap on this. If this is actually just downtime, right? What is my reason code, right? So, and then let's assume that 5 minutes have gone by, and then I could just save this. Okay, so I'm thinking about this. It's a clock in, clock out thing, and then you're able to go in and review the entries or review the operations. So from an operator standpoint, if someone wants to look at this operator OP1 for that timeline, then you would see all of the time. So I actually recorded a few minutes this morning against that. The MO should be showing here somewhere. Yeah, against MO 54, and there's another time recorded. Okay, now all of this from a shop floor perspective, this is where you could leverage the barcoding modules. And again, from a barcoding modules, don't just think about this as scanning, but the barcodes allows the capture. If you recall at the beginning of the presentation, I said it allows you to capture movement of goods or shop floor transactions, right? So recording machine time or recording receipt time or scrap quantities. So I'm going to log in. This is the Windows emulator for barcoding, but think about this. This comes in as an app on iPhone, Android. If you have just a tablet, smart tablet, or an iPad, perhaps you could use this, or a ruggedized device if you're into a more rugged environment. So I'll log in as user 1. I'll pick my company. In this case, it's Auto Simply Sample Inc. and the date. And if I click on OK, depending on the licensing of this, and the key concept of this, there's two things. this could be a means to allow people to capture time on a more timely basis at a reduced price, like not consuming a land pack of Sage 300, but a land pack of barcode, right, which is definitely less expensive. But you're able to track, right, to record information anytime, anywhere, and write, like, basically on a timely basis, right? So these are the different operations. These are all modular. So the basic transactions like PO receipt, OE shipments, PO returns, OE return, again, all kinds of stock movements. There's the IC extended that you can do with this. Whether you want to do, again, maybe barcoding could be implemented without manufacturing. So you could do IC assemblies, for instance. And if you look at manufacturing, this, or even shop floor, like as we were just looking at, this is where you could go in and put in your runtime, cleanup time, rework, downtime. So the idea is, instead of using the standard screen that I showed you earlier, you could use this to do, like, for instance, like a manufacturing issue. So if you click on this, again, user would see what they have license for. And again, this could be, if on your traveler, your MO documents, that you would have a barcode, they could scan the MO, right? If I do a search here, there's my, let's say, MO54, and I could go in here, and now that I've selected this, okay, there's my MO54. These are the components on the MO54. So if I actually select my first line, it's going to suggest how many should I pick. So if I actually pick this, I can do this as E means enter, so I could manually enter the count. Or if this is S for scan, so every time that I scan, depending on the environment you're into, maybe I scan the UPC or the label, and I then enter the quantities. But let's put in 5 in here, and okay. And then I'm gonna hit the post. And Amanda, I'll wrap up shortly. I know we have a few minutes left. And let's just go and post the issuance. What I wanted to show you is now, through the barcoding solution, so that MO54 are issuance. If I look at the issue 17, right? If I go back in Sage 300, and if I go to my MF module, manufacturing, so if I look at manufacturing, and I look at my MF transactions, material issuance, and if I look at my issuance 17, you'll see that it posted, right? It's fully 17 right here. So there's my issuance for a quantity of 5. There it is, right? So again, barcoding, think about this not just as scanning, but as a mechanism to capture stock movements or operations from the floor, or in the case of shop floor, or from a mobile device. And just 30 seconds on the one module that we did not cover is quality control. Quality controls allows you to set up your own list of questions, okay? Allows you to set either certain categories of vendors or categories of items, and force a user to enter results, right? Quality results. So to basically, like when an item is actually set up with a category that's set up to be a QC, every stock movements of that item, so purchase order receipts or receipt assembly for the manufacturing, would go into a logical location. So if you think about your IC locations, maybe location is 1, but what you would do is create a 1Q location, for instance, and which would be a logical. So automatically, when the system recognizes or sees a transaction of an assembly or of a receipt to that transaction, it does an IC transfer and transfers the goods from that physical location, location 1, into the 1Q. And then upon the user entering a quality control results, the system then says, yep, if it's within the boundaries, I will then change back or transfer back the goods into that one location from that QC location. So those are all pending QC tests that needs to be done. And then the idea would be the user would come in, put in the value, and once you post the values and release them, it transfers them back to the IC location. Again, an entry-level QC solution, but it's kind of nice you're able to actually attach documents to those transactions. Okay. So I know that was a lot to take in, perhaps, but I feel we did cover the main part on the manufacturing production planning. I know we covered pretty quickly the shop floor. And then we looked at the barcoding, and then finally just the quality control. So if you do need to see any sections in more depth, reach out to us at BAS, and we'll be more than happy to dive in more details in any of the sections.